Hello, everyone. My name is Epiphany Adams, and today I will be presenting on autism spectrum disorder in adults. For the remainder of the presentation, I will be referring to autism spectrum disorder as ASD or autism. So let's get into it. For some background, some typical symptoms of autism that we look for when diagnosing individuals are abnormal or delayed social communication and interactions, restricted or hyperfocused interests, and autistic like behaviors. When you're an adult and you're getting diagnosed for autism, what they look for in a requirement is that you have to have shown these symptoms when you were younger. So, as adults, it might be a little bit more difficult to remember if we had these mannerisms when they were younger. So, one of the questions that they tend to ask are, were you able to meet your development goals on time? Were you able to learn how to potty train on time? Stuff like that. Adults with autism typically experience functional and emotional difficulties, and the difficulties really depend on where they are in the spectrum. So, for instance, there's stage one autism, which most people typically have, which is like the quote unquote less severe kind, where it's just the social delays, communications, and not being able to understand social cues. But remember, autism is a spectrum, and everybody varies on that spectrum from less severe or stage one to stage three, which is more severe, and they're typically nonverbal. So the prevalence rates really surprised me, where less than 1% of adults were reported having autism. That surprised me the most. And um, in terms of gender, men reported having autism more so than women when we didn't take into consideration intellectual disabilities. But when we did take into consideration intellectual disabilities, men were still higher, and there was no difference or statistically significant difference when looking at race or ethnicity. As for the impacts, when it comes to individuals, a lot of them reported social isolation and bullying, just feeling like being the other person amongst their peers. When it came to their families and caregivers, they reported positive influences in their social interactions with other people when their family or caregivers were very involved with them, whether that was financially, emotionally, or psychologically, which was really nice. Another report, as it impacts the community, is that adults with autism typically are not employed as often as neurotypical individuals because of their autism. But as employers, they're missing the opportunity to have somebody with a very unique skill set than neurotypical people. So is this a problem? Of course not. This is definitely not a problem. But the people who are experiencing the autism do typically have some challenges, as we listed above. Going into some of the interventions I was able to find, and there were a bunch of them, when it came to looking at the level A, the studies, some of them were vitamins and mineral supplements, fluoxetine, which is an antidepressant, oxytocin, acceptance and commitment therapy, and social skills therapy. For our level B, which was actually promising data, it wasn't the most effective, but it still gave some evidence that it was effective to an extent, which was cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. And an intervention that I found pretty interesting was chelation therapy. And pretty much what that is that has to do with the toxins in your body as a result of minerals or metals. So they just try to pretty much like in a way, in the simplest term possible, detox your body, which was a belief back in the day that all these heavy metals influenced the way somebody got autism. So, going into the interventions and practice, we will be focusing on social skills training and ACT because these show the most effective results in helping those, adults with autism. I wouldn't say alleviate because autism isn't like a disease or like a typical disorder. This is like neurodevelopmental. So, this more so is like the brain and just how they act. So, it just helped them be able to navigate through society and their interactions better. So let's start with social skills training. So social skills training is what it is. It is just a training to help you develop and improve your social skills over time. So this could be you learning how to interact with somebody, you learning how to navigate certain social interactions and certain scenarios. Like how do you deal with somebody who's angry or how do you deal with somebody who's expressing themselves to you? How do you learn to pick up on social cues and body language? Stuff like that is taught in social skills training. And there's a variety of different programs that use social skills training as a basis, and they're called different things. Like for one of the studies, it was called the Peers Program, which allowed individuals over 14 weeks, I believe. Let me check. 12 weeks, my apologies, that was a different study. Over 12 weeks, they were able to work with some of their peers and just work in the community on their social interactions and learning how to interact with others and also understanding how to comprehend what somebody else is feeling. When they were able to do this program, they actually reported positive results. They reported feelings like less feelings of loneliness and improvements in their social qualities. And what was really sweet is that the families and caregivers also saw the improvements in their social skills over time. And through a systematic review, majority of the literature has shown that social skills training does help improve social skills and abilities for adults with autism. There was only one study that did show that it was not effective, but that's because it produced more anxiety within the individuals, and it was working with those with more severe autism, or those within like stage 2 or 3 of autism. So I would love to see this implemented throughout different like stages of autism and not just stage 1, but we'll get into that later. But social skills training just allows the person to build their confidence and their abilities to interact with others in society and their peers so that they feel more confident and don't feel like the other. So social skills training, or SST, has shown to improve these social skills and their confidence to be able to interact with their peers. And going into confidence and acceptance is acceptance and commitment therapy, or as we know, ACT, which is an intervention that encourages individuals to accept their thoughts and feelings rather than fighting them or feeling guilty. And one of the reports that I've seen through all the literature I researched was this feeling of not being confident to interact with their peers, or feeling like their autism is like ruining their life, or just stressing them out overall. So the ACT is helping them feel more confident about themselves with autism, helping them realize that they are just like everyone else. They just think differently and they function differently, but that doesn't make them any worse than a neurotypical person. They just do things differently sometimes, and that's okay. So, one study showed that those who participated in the ACT intervention perceived less stress and had a better quality of life because they thought so much better about themselves. And moreover, there was a statistically significant improvement in autistic mannerisms where they were able to have better control and better awareness of some of the things they did. So they were able to become way more confident in themselves and their abilities to function around others, which was so nice. And when looking at some of the literatures, like some of the literature reviews, they found that ACT improved the psychological health in adults with ASD. So they reported less depression, less anxiety, less suicidal thoughts because they felt so much more confident in themselves. So instead of feeling this need to medicate autism, which I found was a which wasn't researched as much, but some of the immediate alleviators to autism was giving those pills like oxytocin, fluoxetine, different SSRIs, antipsychotics to like alleviate their autistic mannerisms. But autism isn't like this typical disorder like depression or ADHD. It's really who they are, and it's just this neurodevelopmental thing that they have. So this idea of medicating it isn't the most effective, which is why I didn't do it. But also, we can't medicate autism. It's not something that is typically supposed to be medicated. You can't just fix it. So AST and SST are like my go-tos for like social workers who want to help the adults with autism get through their social skills and those interactions, feel more confident in themselves, and just improve being in relationship with others. A really good show you guys should watch that actually is like a version of social skills training and AST, but it's more so like in show form, is Love on a Spectrum, Australia. It's the sweetest thing, and it's about individuals with autism finding love in relationships. And it's the perfect way to show that they're becoming confident in themselves and accepting that with autism, they function a little differently from other people. So you should go watch that and then really think about this presentation as you watch it. So some gaps I found in the research were, for one, there was gender differences and even like ethnic differences. For one, men were pretty much studied the most throughout all of these studies. So I would love to see more studies where women are integrated because women are underreported for autism. And also specifically black women as well are very underreported for autism. And it shows up so differently for us depending on like your culture and your gender, the transition into adulthood. So most of the literature was focused on youth. So I would love to see more on adulthood and even just that general transition of how their autistic mannerisms improve over time into their adulthood. Another thing that wasn't talked about was just social supports that they have and relationships, whether romantic, familial, or platonic. How does their autism like impact those relationships, but also what interventions are used that collaborate with them to improve those relationships and social support, and also just to help them find social support that may benefit them in the future. And lastly, aging in long term. A lot of the studies I found, did not talk about how aging over time, like the older you get, does impact your autism and your autistic mannerisms. So I would love to see more research talking about how over time, the more you age, how does autism like affect the way you think, the way you function, the way you move, all those things the older you get. So those are some of the gaps in the research. So thank you so much for watching my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be here if you have any questions or want to know anything more. Thank you.